I got up to drop point 76 around 12:30, something like that, and I met George Poe, and he was operating a private hire dozer. What I wanted him to do was start working down the ridge from drop point 76, tie in with the Lima strike team dozers, the 3 dozers working up, and then the 4 of them to work as a unit along that ridge. So that was what our plan was.
So we're coming in behind Clayton, improving the line that was already there and then pushing a new line. When we got down there, George was just widening out the line that was already there. And I'd go out ahead of him a little bit, looking things over, trying to find a good spot for a safety zone. And one of them was there where we actually deployed. You kind of come down into a bowl-like area out of a plantation that we'd first started in. And the timber type got a little bit bigger and a little bit thinner. And of course there's a big old drain there that had been to the east of it. It's probably 30, 40 foot wide and 20, 30 foot deep.
And then Tommy was scouting ahead. I came down to that spot, and so I peeled off and just made a couple passes. And my habit as a dozer operator from prior experiences, whenever I see good ground, I try at least to throw a couple blades wide in spots like that on my way through.
And right below that was the cabin. And I could hear somebody down there talking around that cabin. So I go on down there, and it was the person that owned it. And they were trying to get an old wrecker truck running. So I helped them there for just a couple minutes, and they decided they couldn't get it going. So they started getting other tools and some other stuff and left out. Well, I went back up there to talk to George, and he was still pushing on that area there that was going to try to do for a safety zone. And I hadn't talked to him just a minute or two, told him, keep pushing like he was. And Clayton, the one down the hill with the masticator, he hollered at me and said, "Can you hear that noise?" And of course, since I work with him every day, when he said that, I knew what he meant. And I said, "No, I'm right here by the dozer when we back up." So when I backed up and turned around and looked, I could see the black smoke. Then I got away from the dozer, I could hear it. And he goes, "I'm here by the cabin. If you're close by, come on down, we'll have a face-to-face." So I jogged down there within just 100 yards or so. And he's still looking up at the smoke column and stuff. He's like, "I'm gonna get my equipment and we're gonna go on down." And I'm like, "All right, I'm gonna get back up here and we're gonna make this area as big as we can." He's like, "All right, sounds good." So, I mean, we did that in about 30 seconds. So he went down the hill and I went back up. Since I'd seen that whole line the day before, from about right there on down for another half mile or so, that manzanita was thick. It was just a real narrow ridge back. And with an older dozer, and George, being an older fella, I didn't want to take a chance if anything was to happen. We were at the best place that you could be at in a half mile either direction or further. So I just chose to stay there. Got up there and George was still pushing, and I stopped him. And I just kind of pointed over my shoulder. I said, "You need to hurry up and make it as big as you can." That's the last time I remember seeing a smoke column. And it went from that smoky gray to like a jet black in just that matter of a few minutes there.
Tommy Struther ran back up and says, "Make it bigger." And that's in our conversation. I just went to work. And because we didn't have to explain to each other what was happening.
Fire intensity started picking up. We talked longer about where we were and what was going on. It really started picking up, started getting a lot louder. So at 5 o'clock, 1700 hours, we made the decision to evacuate the line and back off and take a different stance. So I radioed the Lima strike team leader. I said, "We need to back off the line, RTO, or dive off into fire camp, wherever you are on the ridge, whatever's the easiest to do." I called Tommy and told him the same thing. I said, "You need to evacuate the line, either turn off one of those roads or drop into fire camp, whatever's the easiest, because I'm not sure how far down the ridge they are." And he said, "Well, we're building a safety zone. It's a pretty good spot. I think we're going to wait right here." And so Branch was in his pickup and he was right beside me, and I turned to him and I said, I think I need to go down and check on those guys, make sure they're okay.
I just backed up right out of the way, and I sent my dad a text and let him know fire was going to hit the line pretty hard. And I stuck it back in my pocket, and I felt it vibrate there a minute or two later, and I pulled it out and looked. He goes, "Okay, take care." So, I mean, like I said, there was nothing he knew he could do to help setting at the house in Arkansas. So, he said, "I knew you'd do the best you could with what you had."
And I started down the dozer line towards George and Tommy. Partway down the line, there was a crown fire that ran down on the far side of me, so out my left window of my vehicle, and was running in the crown and basically passed the truck. Just a short run, but it went faster than I was driving. And it turned and went down a drainage, so it wasn't directly following my path, but it burned along the edge of the fire and then down the drainage. And I just thought to myself that that's probably not a good thing. It's better for fire to burn uphill and away from us and not downhill and not running in the crown downhill.
Well, we could hear the fire coming. We could hear it coming, and we knew it was coming. And so I figured I had about 15 minutes of head start to knock out a deployment site as big as I could make it with the time given until it was on us. Circumstances put us at that point, and as far as the deployment site, that was the best ground we had available. I was working when Tom Browning showed up with his pickup, and I was really surprised.
When I pulled into the safety zone, they were still working on it. It was quite small, and I thought, this is not going to be a good spot. So my gut feeling was that it wasn't big enough. So before I got out of the truck, I hit a waypoint on my GPS unit, and I called communications, and I gave them our location. And I couldn't say the actual minutes and seconds of the GPS coordinates, because inside I'm thinking, this is where I'm going to die, and I want to tell you where to come find me. So I just read the numbers, north and whatever the numbers were. I just said dot and then the rest of the numbers. I just couldn't say decimal and minutes. It just wouldn't come out, and I did that, and they repeated it. I said, yep, that's our location. And so I started to get out, and the safety officer called me, and I've known him for 8 years. We worked together, and he said, really, before you get too involved into the task you're in, you got to make sure you give yourself enough reflex time that you still have enough time to evacuate the area. And I just said, Steve, this is where we're going to stay. This is our location. He said, I understand. No more discussion. And so I got out of the vehicle, or Tommy had come up to my window, and I said, make it bigger. He goes, how big? I go, as big as you can in the time that we have left.
As the situation was getting dire, I was going as fast as was practical to clear the spot, and wasn't worried about neat, just blasting out as much material as I could in all directions.
And I said, Tommy, we need to get my vehicle in the center of this area to give it the best protection. So I said, this is about where this location is going to be. So I backed up, pulled into what looked like the center. He said, okay, I think that's what we have for now. I said, all right, that'll do. And I got out of the vehicle, and I took my fire shelter out of my pack, and I put it under my arm. And Tom said, you think we're going to need that? I said, yeah, I think we're going to need these. He said, okay, I'll grab mine too.
At that point, now I figured we might have to either get behind the truck or maybe pull one out just to shield the heat. But I wouldn't think it was going to get as hot as it did.
And the fire kept working downhill towards us. So it's coming from the north, working to the south, southwest, off the ridge. And it's a loud, intense crown fire working its way. Not just running right at us, but working down the ridge and burning to the west. The winds were very significant. They were outflow winds, and then they would turn around and suck right back into the fire as soon as things were going. So a lot of things going through my mind at this time. One, should I fire out? If I do, is that going to change the intensity of the fire and draw it onto us quicker? So I'm weighing out those options. Should I deploy in the vehicle to have more protection? Kind of had a gut feeling my vehicle was going to catch on fire, and I didn't want to be in it while it was burning. So maybe the best option is for the three of us to get under the dozer or some other shelter close to the area. And all this is going on, things are happening really, really fast. And I turned to Tommy and I said, Tommy, I'm sorry I got you into this because I'm not having a good feeling about where we are. I'm sorry I got you into this, man.
Ah, hell, this is nothing. Woo! Dang. So I go over, we're talking, you know, and that's when he says he's sorry for getting me into this. And I told him it's fine. And we're still sitting there just spotting all the things out there as far as the little spot over behind us. And
the ember fallout was significant now and it was going everywhere it could. So I'm just thinking, you know, every way I can to kind of remain calm and think about the options I still have available. And George kept pushing and the smoke was black, we could hardly see. And he kept pushing and we kept standing there until it got too hot. And it just got too hot that you knew you had to deploy the shelter.
George was still continuing pushing. You know, I could feel that the heat had gotten a little bit hotter, but it still wasn't that bad. And so I ran around up there closer to Tom's truck to get up that way. And but I wasn't going to get in mine until George had done stopped and was going to get in his.
And then about the time I couldn't push it anything anymore, because like I said, we were pretty much surrounded by fire at that time. I backed up, and my intent was to dig the cat in the middle by the pickup and get all of us under the cat. So I made a pass to dig in, and then I worked too long. I should have stopped a few minutes sooner, but I worked too long trying to get as much protection as we could. And so I made a pass this way, and then I swung around to push up a hump of dirt the other way. And that's when the heat hit me like a club, and I had to hold my breath, park the cat, grab my web gear, rip it off I had a bungee to the cage, side of the cage. I tore it off and dove off the running board head first.
And I turned to Tommy, I said, now. And I grabbed the red tabs on my shelter and I pulled them and I grabbed the shelter and I dove to the ground. And I'd made the decision I was going to deploy outside the vehicle and use the vehicle as a barrier between me and the fire. And I hit the ground with my head in it and then I kicked my feet into it and then pulled it over me.
Once I seen him get off and run around back of the dozer, I knew he was getting up under it. So that's when I started getting into my shelter. I don't know, I tried grabbing that little red tab and I couldn't get it to pull loose, so I just took my knife there I had in my pocket and just cut it loose.
So I was scrambling to the back of the cat. I threw my ball cap away, put my hard hat on, crawled into my gloves and into my shoulder, but absolutely had to have those gloves. And hit the ground to get out of the heat. By that time there's heat everywhere. There's no refuge from the heat in any direction. So scrambled around, ripping and tearing at that fire shelter. And I was in a confined space, so I unfolded it fold by fold under the cat and got in it. That's when I got my lower legs scorched from the heat in the time it took to deploy that shelter underneath the belly pan.
It's all accordion pressed together, and I was having to pry it all apart, and with that high wind we were having, I'd have to kind of fold it out in front of me and let it kind of blow against me. And once I finally got it spread out good enough where I get my head and shoulders in there, I'd just laid down and started kicking my feet up in it to get it spread out the rest of the way to shield me from the heat. Once I got inside the shelter, it was a lot more comfortable in there as far as temperature. So I mean, I don't think I could have lasted too much longer out there without actually started getting burnt pretty bad.
And we waited too long before we deployed our shelter, but we waited till the last minute, hoping that the winds would shift, the fire would die down. And we're thinking if this thing could just die down a little bit, we'll be okay here. And there's always that feeling about you had to deploy a shelter, you know, what you do wrong, how'd you get there? So you're thinking every way you can about how to avoid that and not put that shelter on until you really have to.
Once I was fully inside of it, it was like night and day. That shelter was extremely effective to block the heat. It was even comfortable inside that shelter. And I didn't have the wind issues that the two Toms did because the cat was blocking the wind.
So I called communications and I told them we deployed our shelter. They said they understood and asked what the conditions were. I said, we're taking some heat, but we're doing okay. And then I pulled the radio back inside the shelter and made every effort I could to try and hold the shelter over me and not blowing off of me. Because it was going up and over, and at one point I had to lie completely on my right side to hold that side of the shelter on the ground because it wanted to blow off of me. And it's not just the wind blowing in one direction, because it shifts as the flame fronts move through. You know, they hit us from 3 different sides, and we get wind effects from that, both directions. So you're constantly moving and trying to hold the thing down. It's a struggle.
I remember being in there and sitting in that shelter, and you could hear the wind popping it and the embers and stuff hitting it real loud.
And the embers were pounding on us like there was no tomorrow. So what surprised me the most, I think, was it got hot. Really, really hot. And this always kind of is a quandary to me, because I thought, well, this is the place I'm going to die, but I didn't think I was going to be this hot. So it got hot. A couple things were going through my mind. I'm thinking of George, and I'm going, it's hot, and he's underneath that dozer. I hope he doesn't panic and run, because he was too far away from me to talk to him.
I was mostly concerned about those two guys because I had my Bendix King, but I couldn't raise them on TAC. I tried TAC and command with no results, just to notify everybody. I knew that Tommy had already maintained communications, but just as a backup, but was unsuccessful, so I gave up on it. But I was mostly concerned about those two guys because I knew they were taking more heat than I was. And I was face down for a while, head toward the back of the blade. And the blade gives you lots of protection, and especially if you, I was in mid stride when the heat hit me, so I didn't have a blade full of dirt like I normally would. But that's your best protection, is that blade full of dirt, and the blade, that's a big heat shield. And then the tractor's a whole heat shield for you. So then there I am in the fire shelter, secure under the cat. But my main concern was the cat burning down on top of me.
The other things that were going through my mind is people that died in shelter. And it got really, really hot then. And then my instinct said, you got to get up and you got to get out of here, because it's too hot to survive. And if you don't leave, you're going to die right now. And then my training said, you know, if it's that hot in here, you can't survive outside. You got to relax. You got to calm down, and you got to take some shallow breaths, and you got to get closer to the ground. So I remember shoving my helmet into the dirt, and then putting my hand up under my nose and digging a hole in the soft dirt so that I could get my nose below the ground level, and telling myself, breathe slower. Oh, that's better. And that worked.
I remember being in there a couple of minutes and Tom talking to me, you know, making sure everything was all right, seeing how I was doing. I could hear him talking to ICP on the radio. We talked a time or two more there, make sure everything was all right. So I just tried to breathe as slow as I could and just kept my face down into the dirt the best I could. And like I said, all the smoke and dust, my eyes was watering, my nose was running. Kind of hard to do that without breathing in some snot and tears. But me and Tom kept talking. I had my handkerchief in there to wipe my nose and face off every now and then. But that's what everybody's told us. We've all stayed calm. That's the best thing I think we could have done, was stay calm.
And at one point I was worried about my truck catching on fire, so I thought, well, I'll kind of peek out underneath the shelter to see if it's there. And the heat that came in was so intense that I couldn't. I said, well, it's on fire, it's on fire. It's too hot to go out there. Another point, I took the back of my hand and pushed up on the shelter to, one, get it off of me, and two, to feel how hot it was. And it instantly burned the back of my hand. And I thought, ooh, that's hot. So, you know, that was just really uncomfortable, and it was really dry. My throat was aching and it hurt to breathe. And then finally the winds calmed down and got quieter. We got less embers falling on us. And I touched the inside of the shelter and it was cooler. And I peeked out underneath like, oh, I got to check on my truck. And so I peeked out and there wasn't that blowtorch of heat coming in. So I lifted it up and looked, and sure enough, my truck's on fire. Dang, got to put my truck out now.
Tom stuck his head out and he goes, the truck's on fire. Of course, all the smoke stuff, eyes was watering, nose was running. So I climbed out and it was still breezy. And so I kind of looked around there and found an old clob of dirt, rolled over on my fire shelter, and we started putting the truck out. And we got that done right quick, and he's like, we need to go check on George. So he walks over there, and I'm right behind him. He's hollering, we can hear George answering us back. So he comes out, and we walk over and sit on the tailgate of his truck and talk and make sure everything's all right, drinking some cold water. And pretty much from that point on, we were just sitting there telling stories and catching up on everything.
And then I called communications. I said, all three of us are out. Dozer operator George has a minor burn on his lower leg, but we're all okay. They said, all right, we're going to check back with you every few minutes. So they would check back. Like 3 minutes later, they're calling, how you doing? I said, we're fine, we're okay. Go ahead with the rest of the fire. We'll be okay till we get out of here. And they kept calling back. So finally I said, look, we're all okay. We're sitting on the tailgate, we're drinking nice cold water, everything's fine here. And that just kind of relaxed the rest of the people on the fire, the folks that I knew that I'd worked with, because kind of a joke, kind of relaxing the whole atmosphere of what was going on, and we were doing better.
Well, Tom had a bag phone, had better service than his truck, so he called his wife, George called his wife, and I called my dad, let him know we're all right. Once we called ICP and let them know we done out of our shelter and everybody was fine, we asked them if they wanted us to come on out. And they said, no, just stay right there. That they were going to send a shot crew in to get us. It took them 3 hours because all the roads up there were compromised with the fire. So like I said, it took them a while to get up there. It was like midnight time we got back down to the base camp that evening. The line medics met us up there after the hot shots got us up to that drop point 76. They checked us out, sent us on into camp. We seen some medics there, and that's when they decided to send us on to the hospital in Wairika.
We go back down to the fire camp to ICP, have reunion of the team and the camp medic, and my crew was there. Everybody that knew us was there to check on us and wish us well. And then we rode to Wairika to the ER and got checked out.
Then the next day we had the full SISM back in Wairika, and that went really well. It was good for the three of us to sit around and really talk about what occurred and what was going on. Then I packed up my stuff and went home, and it was like, they said, are you coming back? I said, I don't know. I went home, and for 2 weeks, every night, I wake up in the middle of the night, cold sweats, nightmares. What could I have done differently? How could this have been avoided? What was going on? I put that down in writing, and it helped me kind of work through that. And the people off the team called, folks that I figured doubted my capabilities for what had occurred, called me just to check on me, to reassure me, to let me know it was all right. And that was very powerful. One guy called and he said, I wasn't going to call because I don't know what to say. So I decided to call and say, I don't know what to say. And that was enough, just the call. And it made a difference. About 3 weeks afterwards, we had a fire and did what I know how to do. And I didn't have to stop and think about it. And it felt right. I felt confident that I could still make good decisions, and that was important. That first fire was really important to get re-engaged and do what you do without second guessing everything you're doing, because I didn't know if I could do that. And the number one, the biggest thing is calm is contagious. That you have to remain calm in order to make good decisions. And if you're calm, the people around you will be calm. And in order to do that, when you're in a horrific event like we were, you got to compartmentalize things. Because your first instincts are, how in the world did I ever get here? Why am I in this situation? But you can't do anything about that. You have to put that in a box and set it aside and say, what can I do now in order to make this situation more survivable? And start working on those tactics. The second thing is trusting your equipment. You know, when I was in there and laying in that shelter, all I could think about were the people that died in fire shelters. You know, the Yarnells, the 30 Mile, the Esperanza that didn't even get a chance to pull their shelters. But I couldn't think of anybody that lived through a shelter. Those things work, and I'm here to tell you they work. And that if you don't know anything else, know that I survived this, and you can too. And probably the most important lesson is trust your instincts. And trust your instincts till they conflict with your training, then trust your training. And up until that conflicts with what you're doing, because that happened to me. My instincts told me to run. And if I would have ran, I wouldn't have survived. My training told me that I was better off to stay in there and stay in that shelter and do what I can do to get lower and get cooler air. You have some experience that's going to give you some instincts that are going to guide you in the right direction. But your training has got to be your core.